Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Keiser Education Series. My name is Gabe Durman, and I'm a Human Performance and Education Specialist at Keiser. I'll be moderating today's panel alongside my teammate, Mike Compton. Today's discussion is centered around the topic of connecting with individuals through coaching. Our two panelists are both former Division I athletes that have over 25 years combined as full-time strength conditioning coaches. They've worked with athletes and coaches of all different backgrounds and join us today to share how they've been able to connect with those individuals and create meaningful relationships in concert with their well-rounded technical skills of coaching. Our first panelist is Coach Lindsay Alexander. Lindsay is a strength conditioning coach at the University of Iowa, working with women's basketball and women's gymnastics while simultaneously serving as special assistant to the Deputy Director of Athletics. Before Iowa, she coached at Purdue, working with women's golf, women's tennis, women's swim, and men's and women's diving, along with assisting with women's soccer. At Illinois State, she competed for the swim team and went on to earn both her bachelor's and master's as she served as a graduate assistant strength conditioning coach, working with multiple teams, including basketball and football. Our second panelist is Coach Gabby Quiggle. Gabby is in her 13th year as a strength conditioning coach and currently serves as a director of Olympic strength conditioning at the University of Washington. At UW, she is part of two national championship teams, both with women's rowing. Prior to her time in Seattle, Gabby worked at the University of Iowa for 7 years, where she served as Associate Director of Olympic Strength Conditioning. She earned both her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Kansas, where she competed for the Jayhawk women's soccer team, then went on to become a graduate assistant strength conditioning coach. Side note, on my first day ever as a full-time strength conditioning coach, I had the great privilege of meeting my new colleague, Coach Gabby Quiggle, and she proceeded to allow me to bug her for a very fun and memorable 2 years. So it's awesome that we're able to reconnect and be here with you alongside Lindsay, who you also worked with at Iowa. So thank you to the both of you for joining us today. And Lindsay, we'll start with you. Basketball season, it seems like you got a special player there at Iowa, casually dropping triple doubles every other week. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and awesome to be on here with Gabby, longtime friend and colleague, and I miss her every day.
And Gabby, wrapping up another quarter in Seattle. What's going on up there in the Pacific Northwest?
We're just trying to stop complaining about the rain up here in the Pacific Northwest, but happy to be here. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, so I'm very thankful to be on such a prestigious panel with my buddies as well.
Great. Awesome. Well, we appreciate both of you and we're ready to get started. We often hear people say it's important to have good relationships or you have to build a good relationship. And while that's easy to say, it's not always easy to do. So to get the ball rolling with our conversation today, and I'll begin with Lindsay, then Gabby, if there's anything you'd like to add on top of that, what does it mean to have a good relationship? It can be a definition or descriptive words. What does that mean to the both of you? And we'll start with Lindsay.
Yeah, I think to have a good relationship, whether it's with your coaches or your student athletes, I think it has to be honest. It needs to be flexible and understanding. And then in understanding that also it's not always a two-way relationship. So, when I say honest, being open with your student athletes, open with your coaches. I'm a big believer of being you. When you see me outside of the weight room or in the weight room, you're getting the same person. It's not a flip of a switch when I'm coaching out on the floor or, I'm on the sideline or you see me, with my family or whatever outside of the weight room. So I think that's really important. So they get to know me as a person. And then being flexible, understanding, whether it's with our coaches or student athletes, they're under a large amount of stress and, you got to be flexible about where they're at in that time. And then understanding where they come from, what their background's like, how do they, cope in certain situations and working and through that. And understand it's not always a two-way street. Sometimes your relationship with them is different than their relationship with you. And I think that's really important to understand that, it's going to be different with student athletes and different coaches and even on the same staff, how that works and the communication with those. So that's how I would describe that.
Yeah, I like what you said there. Honest, flexible, and understanding, but then also acknowledging that it isn't always a two-way street because it's often easy to get sucked into that and saying, oh yeah, it should be a two-way street and both sides should have, equal parts in the relationship, but acknowledging that it shouldn't always be that way, especially with student athletes. I appreciate. Gabby, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just touching on the things that Dink talked about, and disclaimer, I call Dink, even though she's now an Alexander. But transparency, I think within strength and conditioning, we're not in the business of keeping secrets. So meeting a student athlete or coach or support staff member where they are, I think is really helpful to be able to develop that sort of connection as far as a good relationship goes.
Yeah, and a little bit more on meeting them where they're at. And this question is in line with that. The both of you have extensive experience in strength conditioning, and both have worked with a large number of student athletes of different backgrounds. I think we all recognize the importance of having a good relationship, but we're curious to know more about a little bit about that process. So the process of meeting somebody where they're at. So Gabby, we'll start with you on this one. I'm a new athlete of yours. I've never met you. As a coach, what are the types of things that you're focusing on in the early stages of working together that will eventually help you build a strong relationship?
Yeah, I think it's hard to admit that sometimes the lifting and conditioning sessions aren't the first priority of a student athlete. And some of those new relationships include transfers as well. So you don't often just have a first year, you might just have a first experience with you. New athletes are adjusting to this whole new world of collegiate sport, whether it be academia, whether it be classes, competitive scheduling as well, regimens around their sport that are novel. And I've found that sessions in the weight room become a space that's safe to student athletes so they can shut out all that noise. And they also provide provided that they're given the understanding of my expectations and structure, but really recognizing and validating their experiences on like a human level as well is always the first step for me. And that's at the foundation of kind of, we're working with humans, we're working with young human beings that are developing. And you need to be patient throughout that course of time, even though, it's not guaranteed that they're there for 4 to 5 years as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned transparency. So early on in that process, what is that conversation like? Or what is a typical conversation you have? Are you telling them immediately from the start, hey, I'm going to be as transparent as possible throughout this entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. And being authentic as well. I think authenticity and transparency go hand in hand. And I don't think stepping out of the realms of who I am as a human being is authentic. And I think our student athletes are pretty perceptive at this point. At least they are now. They weren't, maybe as perceptive as when I was a student athlete. We just showed up and did our work. But I think having that sense of authenticity and openness to validating them as human beings on a foundational level helps build that connection in a much more fluid way.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lindsay, over to you. As a coach, what are the types of things that you're focusing on in those early stages as you begin working with a student athlete?
Yeah, just to kind of go off what she said also, and then providing confidence and is really big, and comfort coming into the weight room. A lot of times the student athlete has never been in a weight room before. I work with gymnastics as well, and that's not usually an experience they've had, so it can be overwhelming. So spending time with them, maybe separate the newcomers, I think is really valuable. That's more one-on-one. Everybody's more on an even playing field, not having them around the older girls, because they're grabbing their sheets, they're going, they know what's going on, and the other ones are a little deer in the headlights. So taking time, spending time with them, getting them comfortable with the weight room. This is how equipment works. This is where things go. These are who people in the weight room are. These are the other staff members. I think is really valuable to get them just comfortable being in there. And then that comes with confidence of showing up, and then all the other things will hopefully follow.
So thinking about the things that both of you said, and in the past, is that something that you're always conscious of? Like, what level of comfort, like when you first started as a strength conditioning coach, were these things that you were consciously thinking of? And I'm going to go back to Gabby on this one, then over to Lindsay. Was that something that when you first started off as a strength conditioning coach, you're like, wow, okay, I'm really conscious about this experience for the student athlete versus like the X's and O's of training?
Oh, I was X's and O's. That's all I thought at that moment that I needed to focus on. And I think that has obviously changed in my growth and my own experiences, because I think our student athletes really value connection on a deeper level than, I mean, I think there's also a general need to understand what they're doing, which we should be educated. That's why we're here, educated and knowledgeable around being able to provide that for them. But I also think that it has definitely manifested into more of a connection on a deeper level than such a superficial stance.
Yeah, Lindsay, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, when I first started, I kind of had the idea that, I'm here to be a strength coach and that's what I'm here to do. And we're here to train, and, the personal side wasn't maybe thought of as much. But that's definitely, yeah, I mean, that's definitely changed. And probably, I think we'll touch on this a little bit later, like I said before, not letting them know who you are as a person. I'm this authoritative figure and this is how I have to be. And I mean, that's not how I am. So I think that's probably changed a lot more, and it allows the athletes to get to know you better and makes them, I think, buy in a lot more.
Yeah. So now as we, think about the early stage of relationship and then progressing into kind of year 2 and 3, how does that evolve? So obviously shared experiences are really important to have with other student athletes, especially if you're a strength and conditioning coach that is traveling with the team. Wins, losses, shared experiences can be fertilizer for a connection. But as a coach, is there anything that you're consciously changing in your approach with a more experienced student athlete versus a fresh student athlete? And we'll go over to Lindsay for that one first.
Yeah, I think it's more athlete driven training when they get older. They, the more comfortable they become with the training, with their bodies, understanding the flow of the season and how things are going. I think it's more athlete driven when they get older. I give them more flexibility with maybe exercise selection, rep selection, intensities. And, honestly, if they need, okay, we need to completely scrap this because you played 45 minutes as we went into overtime, then, I'm flexible with that. I understand they're not trying to get out of something. This is what's best for them now. So I definitely think it's more athlete driven as they get older, as far as what, being in charge of their own training a little bit more.
Thank you for that. And Gabby, anything to add on top of that and kind of your approach to athletes as you get into year 2, 3, some of the later years with that student athlete?
I don't think my approach changes. I do think that the context of the conversations change as your relationships grow. I think it's really important that Dink and I touch on a lot of the building off of being brave in those vulnerable situations where conversations aren't really going as maybe you scripted in your mind. I think that helps and that develops, obviously, as time is going on and you're being able to foster those relationships with student athletes.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I think we do need to touch on the fact that you guys were both former Division I athletes. And I'd be curious to see if you leverage your experiences as an athlete to help connect with the athletes that you currently work with. Maybe back then you learned what to do, what not to do, and maybe how to treat other athletes or even coaches. How do you leverage your experiences from the past to where you're at now? Gabby, we'll go to you first.
Being a former Division I student athlete has gotten me in the metaphorical door, I guess you could say, with student athletes. And of course, it's helpful. But for me, this part of the bigger conversation is representation. So I leverage my experience as a queer woman of color more than my history as a Division I student athlete. Our athletes come from different backgrounds, both marginalized and privileged, and to see representations of themselves directly reflected supports a connection that, in my opinion, is the most important. So I think about, for any coach at any level, how are your LGBTQ plus student athletes, your student athletes of color, your student athletes with a mental health history and or food sensitivities, how are they being connected, feeling connected and supported? And if you can't directly do that in your own experiences and identities, you need to educate yourself, and you need to find resources on campus or out there in the world that can.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And it is fascinating on how many different demographics come through the weight room door or even throughout athletics and being able to adjust to who's who and how they operate. Lindsay, do you have anything to add from your experiences as an athlete to where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, kind of go off that. The resources that we have now, I mean, were non-existent when I was a student athlete. So really understanding what's available for our student athletes, using my experience to connect with them. Hey, I understand these are things that you go through throughout the year and what it's like, but really being able to connect them to someone to help, which is something I didn't have as a student athlete, whether it's our sports psych, it's our nutrition, and really understanding the backgrounds of our student athletes and how can I support them outside of strength and conditioning. I don't have the answers to everything, but hopefully I have the answer to who does have the answer, at least, and providing that to our student athletes.
Fully agreed. I think the resources from where we're at now is certainly trending in a positive direction and only look to get better over time. I'll flip it back to Gabe in regards to a little bit more on mentorship.
So you've both put in a tremendous amount of time and have worked really hard to get to where you are now. Can you speak on what it's been like, not just to coach young men and women, but also have the opportunity to use your skills and experiences to serve as a mentor? You know, Gabby, you mentioned the different types of populations and your own experiences. Like, what has that been like for you to kind of change from being, okay, at the beginning of my career, I was a coach, and now moving into I am a coach, but also have the experience and knowledge to potentially serve as a mentor?
I think mentoring, coaching, teaching all coincide together. When I was a younger coach, it was very much a focus on the X's and O's and improving my intelligence on a foundational level of strength and conditioning and the science of strength and conditioning. Now, 13 years and, directly responsible for hiring particular individuals who are working with the demographic of our student athletes that we have. It's really important for me to have new people join a team that it's not just about the hard skills, but building a community and making sure that they feel like they are a part of the team. So, the culture of your organization is really, really crucial.
So how do you do that as someone who is in a strength conditioning role? And obviously you are a cog in a bigger wheel that is the team. How do you do that? Is that a conversation you're having with the head coach about expectations, about the conversations that you're going to be having? Is that something that you do on your own and take initiative on your own to do that? How do you help and assist build that community for student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, at the base level as strength coaches, we're support staff, right? So we are supporting our head coaches in their endeavor to win and develop student athletes. So being able to echo nuances of their culture and their vision and their goals as well, but then also being able to put your own spin on it, and being able to find what works for you as a person and at the level that the student athlete is currently on, to be able to develop and build something that is all very cohesive.
And then how about also trying to do that from the director role that you're in? Obviously, you're in charge of a department now. So is that something that you try to educate your staff on and sort of have the weight room be its own community for student athletes as well, outside of just the team?
Yeah, I think that also comes back to the representation piece, is who is on your staff. What kind of individual are they on a level of identity, what they feel about community as well, and being able to bring in individuals who can support that just outside of our office. I also think it's important to reflect on yourself and where you are currently and where you can grow to better support individuals that you are managing and who they then are managing out on the weight room floor.
Thank you for that. And very well said. And Lindsay, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about some of the experience that you've had now with the opportunity to not just coach, but then also mentor. What has that been like you to go from a former student athlete? Did you think that, number one, you'd be in this position? And then number two, is that something you really enjoyed being able to do, is talk to student athletes now as a former student athlete yourself and coach and mentor? Is that a role that you've really enjoyed taking on?
Yeah, I mean, talking to student athletes after they, have graduated and moved on with their life, and, now they're getting married and you're attending their weddings and sending baby gifts. I think that's, super rewarding. I love that part of my job, is seeing them, how their time here at Iowa has, started them out on their path. And then just seeing their lives change and them become adults and moms and dads and all those things, is really a rewarding part of our job. I think, it's great to win championships and all that, and those are great memories and stuff, but them going out into the world and having an impact on whether it's in the classroom or whatever field they have, I think that's really the cool part of what we do.
Yeah, thank you. And can you tell us a little about some of the work that you do serving as a special assistant to deputy director? Is there anything involved in student athlete well-being that you're involved in, or currently that's a part of your role?
Yeah, so essentially my role is just working on any special projects with our deputy director of athletics. And one of the biggest projects I've been working on since being in this role, I think now it's been for 5 years, is our HERkys initiative, which is really trying to tell the stories and of our female student athletes. So that's been, we've done a variety of different things, whether we've been celebrating 50 years of Title IX. Now we're working on celebrating the 50 years of Iowa women's athletics. We have a podcast that our tennis coach started, and it tells the story of, centered around women's athletics, whether it's coaches, alumni, current student athletes. That's been really great. And then we've started one of our multicultural focus groups is our women's empowerment group. I was involved in getting that started. And that meets once a month with our female student athletes, can attend that, and just connecting all of our female student athletes that maybe wouldn't cross paths with each other. So that's been a really big initiative that I've worked on with our deputy AD on that. And then getting more involved with the community, doing events, connecting our female student athletes with people in our community, and really just trying to tell their stories and rally support around them. So whether that's, in the classroom, professionally, or, getting out and watching them and supporting them on their respective field of play.
Very cool. You mentioned a podcast from the women's tennis coach. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that publicly available?
It is. It's called HERkys Voice. It's on Apple. It's on Spotify. And she does an incredible job. She's such a good storyteller and interviewer, and it's been really awesome. So it's released weekly. I think we're in season 3 of that. So yeah, it's been awesome. She's done a great job. So yeah, check it out for sure.
Cool. Yeah, we'll make sure we share that in the episode notes as well and have a link to that. So thank you for
Awesome.
that. And then Gabby, I know also on your end, you've been involved in some things over at University of Washington in athletics, a couple of different groups for student athlete well-being. Can you tell us about some of the work or groups that you've been a part of?
For sure, and I think I touched on it a little bit. DEI is near and dear to my heart. Diversity, equity, inclusion is something that I have recently gotten really involved in. I think our student athletes they have a plethora of information, social media, news, Instagram, and I think they are thirsting for being able to have a space where they belong. And I have our DEI director, Sheridan Blanford, has been a great resource for us in spearheading our EIB Council, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and being a part of that. I'm part of a subcommittee that's centered around retention and the hiring process, and what we are doing to bring in individuals who will cultivate that sense of equity and inclusion and belonging. She has also created a bunch of subsets of groups for not only student athletes, but staff members to feel like they have space to have that sense of community and representation. I'm part of the Queer Collective as well, which is right now it's mostly staff led, but we're starting to incorporate student athletes. There's also Athlete Ally, which is centered around the LGBTQ+ community. So I think being able to sit in those spaces, not just with direct representations of each space, but also allies of those particular individuals who are open to and receptive to learning and kind of sitting in our own bias and our own privilege. I think reflecting upon those things as a group has been something that I've really kind of sunk my teeth into and been proud to kind of share.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you to both of you for sharing those experiences and some of those resources that you both mentioned. And you both spent time at multiple universities, and we talked somewhat about mentoring some young student athletes and providing support for student athletes, but how about for the staff that you've been a part of? What has mentoring staff been like? And I'll start with Gabby. I mean, I know for me, at least, coming in as a fresh strength conditioning coach, a white male, age 24, 25, like these aren't things that I was consciously thinking of on my first day, or even, 2 weeks in, even a year in. But, as you grow and you're around more diverse people and have diverse experiences, these types of things come up. And, I'm thankful that I at least got to spend some time around you for 2 years, and very grateful for your mentorship. What's that been like now as a director, even in the role that you've been in at other universities or in assistant positions, as a responsibility, or what has that been like to be able to mentor young staff when we're talking about coaches?
Yeah, it goes to meeting people where they are, and being able to provide space to have those conversations. And sometimes those conversations aren't very pretty. Sometimes they are of conflicting opinions. Sometimes they are difficult questions and difficult reflection. And we've had a bunch of good conversations, Gabe, in the past about a lot of things surrounding not directly strength and conditioning, or things that are affecting the world, ourselves personally, and the people who we care about. And I think it's very important to provide that space. So checking in with individuals in an authentic and vulnerable way has been something that's been leading in developing that sense of kind of community and relationships with the staff members, and that extends to student athletes and other staff as well. But when you ask somebody how they are doing, really meaning it. And when they ask you questions that are coming from a genuine place, I used to have some knee-jerk reactions. I think there's been times in America's history that things have been more challenging for people who look like me. And I think in the past, when questions or those conversations came up, I would have my guard up a little bit. And I think now I've kind of been a little bit more settled and comfortable being really, really vulnerable. And I think there's some bravery in that as well. So being able to hear those questions, absorb those questions, sponge them in a little bit, and have open and honest conversations with individuals is kind of how I structure that.
Yeah, you answered it a little bit in terms of for anybody listening, especially someone that might be in a director or a position that you're in, how do you create a safe space, or what advice would you give for a supervisor to create a safe space to have those types of conversations? One of the things you mentioned was checking in, but what does that actually look like? How do you create a space to talk about those types of things in the workplace?
I think also I touched on some self-reflection as well. Where am I? And is that sufficient to be able to support individuals who I don't assimilate with on an identity standpoint or even life experience standpoint? And if I am not able to provide that for a staff member or student athlete, what resources can I provide to them to be able to ask questions or find some information or find some support? And that is, it's an origin conversation that you need to have with individuals of what do you need? How can I support you? And building off of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Obviously, some very candid answers, so appreciate that. And Lindsay, going over to you, what has that been like for you to be able to, you've been a part of a couple of staffs now. What has that been like for you? Do you have feel a responsibility to mentor younger coaches? What's that been like having those types of conversations and having the opportunity to mentor staff and not just student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, we've all been mentored ourselves, so I think it's, I take responsibility and passing that on and sharing my experience and my position with other staff members or our intern class. We have a very, I think, extensive internship program, so we're very fortunate with that. Zach runs that, so I think it's really important that we all take time and sit down with them, not only talking about X's and O's. That's, that we always say you can hire anyone, you can teach them X's and O's of strength and conditioning, but it's the people, it's the relationships and the art of coaching, and how can they connect with the coaches, how can they connect with the student athletes. That's really important, and talking to them through that. I think it's important for the interns to understand, maybe not make this mistake that maybe we did when we were younger out of the gate. It's only about X's and O's. It's okay to be yourself, developing student relationship with the student athletes, and them understanding that, this isn't just going to happen overnight. It's a process, developing those relationships in your career. And, there's ups and downs of that, but, you're not going to go in and have everybody's respect and everybody trust what you're doing just because you're in that role, and how it will take time, and how you develop that with whether it's coaches or student athletes.
Yeah, and to build off that, sometimes I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I have a lot of student athletes who their relationship with me is one that they come in and they conduct their session, they go about their business and they enjoy their day. I have to honor and respect that as well.
You're my cup of tea though, Gabby.
You're mine.
And to go off to what she was talking about a little bit, I think it's important for people to understand about the different backgrounds of staff and our interns and our student athletes. People should, we talk about reflecting, learning myself about, different areas that maybe I'm not a part of, is that it's my responsibility to learn about those areas, to better educate myself. It's not her responsibility to educate me on those areas because she identifies with those areas. I think it's really important as, someone that's mentoring, that you're doing that yourself, is what am I doing to get better and to better understand where our student athletes are, where our staff members are, to meet them where they're at, because it's not their responsibility to teach us.
A lot of good, points that you guys had just mentioned. And I think one that stands out is the title that comes with or the responsibilities that come with the title that you're in. You're the supervisor, you have to manage different personalities. On top of that, I think you guys also touched on reflection and communication. How do I get better to communicate with my staff members, maybe athletes, sport coaches, athletic directors? I mean, you guys are in the thick of it. To that point, are you guys evaluating personalities within your staff? Is there maybe a quick reflection survey that you give your staff, or are you looking at your performance team and how they communicate, horizontally rather than more siloed vertically? Gabby, I'll start with you. Is there anything that you kind of look for to help enhance communication and reflection amongst your staff?
Yes, I think it's hard to quantify. I think personalities, I think grading particular individuals, or, you have those standards that you have to meet from a performance evaluation standpoint. But I think being able to have spaces in which we can communicate about those things, about people's individuals' needs. And more often than not, I think when you have those authentic conversations with individuals and your differences pop up, it's working through those things. Then not everybody has the same personality, for sure. And that's something that I think should be a part of your expertise and role in evaluating individuals. Do I do that on a quantifiable stance? No, I don't. But I feel like I've created a space where individuals can come in a vulnerable way to have conversations and have open conversations, regardless of where our opinions lie.
I mean, the amount of personalities in an athletic department, from athlete to AD, is very, very large, let's say, especially from our experiences. With that being said, do you try to pair certain personalities with the right sport coach with strength coach, or is it, hey, you have to build that relationship, this is your responsibility? How are you managing that? Sorry, that Gabby, follow
That's
up.
you, Gabby.
That's
Sorry.
me. I mean, I think it does, at the foundation of what we do, we have to have a great awareness of the science of strength and conditioning. And I think evaluating that in the hiring process is really, really important as well. Head coaches can be fickle, which is the word that I'm going to use today. Head coaches have needs and wants, and there is a lot of pressure surrounding the success of their team. I understand that wholeheartedly. I also understand that on the spectrum of human nature, personalities, it ebbs and flows. What I try to look for are, can you be brave in your authenticity and vulnerability in your interactions with the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis? If you can do that and be adaptable within that, I think you can be a little bit more pliable in your relationships with people who are in positions of power and or supervising you.
I like what you said, adaptable too, because that's how you grow as a coach. You might not have the easiest, environment to work in, but that's how you essentially grow and get better. Lindsay, from your perspective in the athletic department that you're currently in, do you guys evaluate personalities, maybe relationships, or even communication from maybe an objective standpoint? Or is it kind of similar to Gabby, hey, open door policy, let's sit down, talk about it and press forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate that we all operate out of one weight room as far as where our offices are housed as a staff. So I think that allows us to, have a lot of open, honest conversation, and then in the moment, I think is always really great. It's like, hey, let's talk about this now. We're all here. Let's have a conversation. Yeah. And then assessing, I think, personalities as far as, who works with what sport. I think that's something we always take into consideration as far as what we think will be the best situation, if we can. It's not always a perfect situation, but it makes you a better coach whenever you have to adapt, like she talked about, and you have to be flexible and understand. And you don't always have the same head coaches, so maybe it works now, and then there's a change in staff and on the sports side, and then you can reevaluate if that's something you want to do. Or so I think it's important, but it also can't be the only thing. Because sometimes, there might be a fickle coach or two, and you can't just keep changing their staff members. So it's, how can we support the environment and take care of our student athletes at the end of the day and support our head coaches.
Love it. And then from a communications perspective, let's say a new up and coming coach is struggling. Is there any resources or situations that you would recommend putting in or going to read or listen to enhance your that one coach's communication?
Yeah, I think new coaches, this is a mistake that I made when I was coming up, was not communicating enough. And that's something, I learned when I was at Purdue. It was a great exercise. It's like, hey, you should be meeting with your head coaches once a week. And I think that really just helped develop that relationship. But I would encourage that with young coaches is, get to know the head coach, understand what they're about, what their expectations are of you as a strength and conditioning coach, as a support person, and how they want you to interact with their student athletes. So I think that's really important, is just, communicating with your head coach, and then asking them, what is the best way to communicate with you? Is it email? Is it text? Is it a phone call? How do you want things? Do you want certain things in writing, emails? How much data do you want shared with you? How much of the program do you want to know about? I think it's really important to understand that, because every coach is different. And then understanding the dynamics within the assistant coaches as well is really important. So understanding kind of how all that works will help you be successful, I think.
I think that was valuable insight, and it's kind of funny because it's so simple. Just ask what the best form of communication is. Is it text, email? But it's often overlooked. I'm not too sure why, but I fully agree. It is very simple to enhance that communication, which then, as you mentioned, build that relationship, build that trust. Thanks for sharing.
Lindsay, when you said that, how would you like to be communicated with? I know that was in the context of a coach, but is that something that you're also saying to student athletes when you're coaching them? And not just like, hey, how would you like the practice schedule communicated to you or the lift times communicated to you, but like, how can I best communicate with you in terms of feedback and things like that? Is that something that you're asking, or is that something that you start off with and sort of feel out as you go from year 1 into year 2 and 3? How does that process work?
Yeah, I think, from a communication standpoint, that depends on how the programs ran. But as far as receiving feedback about strength and conditioning and their experience, I think it's, once you feel like they're getting comfortable and confident in what they're doing, that's when you're receiving feedback and asking them, okay, how do you think things are going? Are there things we can do more of? Are there things, you don't like? My thing is, like exercise selection, giving them the ability to select exercises or any variety depending on the time of year. I mean, that's a great way to have them involved and feel like they have some ownership within their training. It's not like, hey, I got to come in and I got to do exactly what's on the sheet and they're in charge and what she says goes. And that's not the case. It's like, how can we, work together? They like these different things. Okay, and then we can incorporate that. Because sometimes they'll say, oh, I hate this exercise. Well, I didn't program it because you hate it. So, okay, maybe we can change it, or maybe we can't, depending on the time of year. But I think that's important, is, getting them involved in that process.
Thank you, Gabby. Anything to add on top of that? I just want to make sure I give you a chance if there's anything there.
Yeah, I also think that a lot of our conversations don't happen in the weight room. So making an effort to visit a practice, go on a road trip, touch base with them in a dining hall, that humanizes you a little bit as a coach, and opens the door to kind of more of a less formal conversation, a less formal interaction. And yes, does that mean you have to put in some extra time and some extra effort? That's what we're here for.
Yeah, my mind kind of got sent to, I was with UW baseball there working. And I remember my dad came out to a practice one time, actually, when he was visiting Seattle. And Coach Meggs, who was the head baseball coach at the time, in the team huddle, was like, did anyone notice anything about Coach Derman today? Everyone's like, what is he talking about? Like, he goes, his dad's here. And he's like, everyone's kind of laughing and giggling. But then he said, we have families too. Like we're humans also. And that's a great point that you bring up there. And you also discuss a little bit, use the term vulnerability. So, I've had some experiences as a young strength and conditioning coach, as an intern, like, oh, athletes should never know what's going on outside of the facility, and you should always be professional, and they should never really know what's going on. So how do you balance that? How do you balance, and whether you agree with that or not, how do you balance professionalism and what's appropriate with like what's okay to share and making yourself vulnerable as a tool? I'm going to go to Gabby on that.
Yeah, I would argue that being vulnerable isn't equal to being unprofessional. Of course, there's a balance. Student athletes want to be your buddy. They want to vent. They want to ask you about your weekend. And it's obviously finding an appropriate line between what you deem as an appropriate relationship. And you should have an understanding of that. And if you don't, you should ask somebody.
Yeah, Gab, and Lindsay, how about yourself? The way that you're able to use vulnerability, maybe to connect with some of your athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole, what's professional and not having a relationship outside, or outside the weight room. I mean, for me, it's impossible. I travel 100% with basketball. I'm spending more time with them than I am my own family, and eating 3 meals a day with them. So they know a lot about my life and my family and my husband and my kid and all of that. So I think, that's what makes it fun. They know about your life, and it makes it easier to have tougher conversations with them, and get to know them. And and for them to buy into what you're doing and lead them along maybe a path of making better nutrition decisions or training decisions or sleeping, because we're sitting on the bus together coming back from Wisconsin 2 nights ago, and we're just talking about whatever. And, that's okay to do. And I think, that's my favorite part. That's why I love being a strength coach. I love getting to know the student athletes and spending time with them. And it makes the hires, the high, times of the year more fun. And, and you're able to be there for them during the lows as well. And I think, because you've been through all of those things together. That's my favorite part of the job, getting to know the student athletes and sharing our lives with them. We work way too many hours to hold that part of our life back. So, yeah.
And athletes are annoyingly perceptive. They really are. So if you approach that that instance or that interaction in a guarded way, you're not going to be able to recover from that. Just, I think being authentic is super important. Our athletes want that. They crave authenticity.
So how about approaching a situation where there has been a breakdown in trust, or there has been a break in the relationship, and it's, not, so awesome? And what is your approach to righting the ship with that student athlete and getting that relationship back on track? And Gabby, I'm going to go to you first.
I don't know why it's so difficult for people to admit that they made a mistake. And it's hard. It's hard. I struggle with it for sure. But being able to take ownership of that and admit it is enough. And it goes a really, really long way. And building off of that with some genuine feedback and receiving that feedback in a mature way has always been kind of, the way that you can navigate that. But just admit when you messed up. That's okay. People make mistakes.
Receiving feedback in a mature way, what does that look like?
Man, well, it's hard when you have a student athlete. Most of ours are teenagers, preteens, or in their 20s, calling you on your stuff and questioning you or questioning your program, or, if trust is broken down, they may be coming at you in an emotional way. I think holding on to that and understanding where they're coming from and seeing it from their lens as well is an easier way to navigate that trust and that breakdown in trust. That answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I think to two things. One, in response to some feedback, after, admitting that you're wrong, and a response to both feedback and vulnerability, whether you're sharing it or that individual is sharing with you. I think one of the things I learned from you was sometimes a really easy answer is thank you. Like saying, thank you for sharing that, or, thank you for listening. And it can be as simple as that, or, hey, thank you for your feedback on this. Like, I'm going to work, to make it right or do my best on this. And it's kind of like a really simple answer, but can be a really effective one. And Lindsay, how about yourself? When you have a breakdown in trust, or, the relationship isn't necessarily where it needs to be at, how do you work with that athlete to get it back on track, if there's anything to add there?
Yeah, well, I think, two things. One, understanding that it could take time. You can't maybe just fix the relationship right away. So I think that's a really important thing, is understanding it's going to take time and maybe a little more effort on your end. And then, just being honest that, hey, I messed up, or, hey, I was wrong about this, and being honest, I think is really important, and understanding that maybe they're going to need some space, and maybe not talking about it immediately, that, hey, they may need a day or two, then we can revisit it and talk about it.
Fantastic. So just kind of harping on the education aspect, throughout our careers and even in undergrad prior to stepping into the S&C space, we have all probably studied some sort of exercise science, kinesiology, and so on. So that is focused more on the science aspect. Should we be focusing a little bit more on the education of relationship and communication building? I mean, there are body language where arms crossed, you're closed off more, arms down, you might be more open to be approached and so on. Should we be establishing that a little bit younger in our coaching, I guess, upbringing, or is that a little bit more towards our grad assistants, our internships, where we're kind of like thrown into the fire, thrown in front of 40 athletes to coach up? Lindsay, I'll start with you. What's your thoughts on like bringing coaching aspects into more of a curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always great to have those conversations and talk about it. But also, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do if you're not actually experiencing it. You can talk about it, say this, think about these things, but until you're actually in the weeds in front of a group of people, it's hard to kind of, really develop those skills, I think. So I don't know if there's a way, you can incorporate that into a curriculum style setting, whether it's, more public speaking experiences in your undergrad, or I think that's the biggest thing is, when I had to get in front of the entire football team for my first time, I mean, that's a scary, intimidating situation. And it gets easier and easier when you did it every day for 3 weeks, and it doesn't become such a big deal. But so I think it's getting that experience interacting with student athletes, especially I think it's the hard part is, interns and GAs is when they're so close in age. And I think that's really navigating that, understanding the professionalism, what we said, like what is okay to talk about, what is not okay to talk about, and really giving them the tools to navigate that situation, because that's really, really hard. Because I experienced that. I was a student athlete, and then, one day I wake up and I'm the GA. And so it's like you become, from being friends with these people, then you're in front of them, telling them what to do. So how do I navigate that, and interacting with that space? So I think that's really important for young strength coaches.
I think that's such a good point to highlight on, especially in your situation. You were an athlete, became a GA at the same university, which I'm sure it was beyond challenging to kind of like separate the two. And then to your point as well, when we were grad students, we were in classes with a lot of our athletes. And then the next day we're coaching them up at, let's say, 6 o'clock in the morning. So kind of shutting that off and kind of pulling the appropriate levers to who you are as a person and establishing that kind of that mature model as a coach. Gabby, any thoughts from your perspective? Are you starting to, I guess, maybe implement that a little bit more on any interns or grad assistants that you oversee?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on Iowa's internship program, and it's one of the best in the country as far as preparing them, not only for the fun in and outs of being a strength coach, but they have to present, they have to have conversations, they have to teach in front of a panel of full-time strength and conditioning coaches, which yes, is very daunting and can seem very intimidating, but that is the type of curriculum that young coaches should be searching for when they're hunting to do work for free. So if you're an intern, that should be something that you're exploring when you're going through the hiring process. Yes, you are in a space where you're trying to advocate for yourself and sell yourself. But I think it's important to ask of the individuals who are hiring you for little to no pay, what they're going to do to support your growth as a coach and what you can gain from that experience as well. And I know the University of Iowa does that really, really well. So I think, yes, finding a curriculum, formal education, and then that education doesn't stop whenever you reach that paid position, that full-time position. You continue to build off of your own curriculum, I guess, so to speak. And we do have mandatory training around sexual harassment or implicit bias. And is that something that is above our head, maybe more on Dink's level of administration, to support what is on the forefront of the global platform as far as education for our student athletes and staff, and how can we trickle that down and infiltrate our athletic department because our touch points are so high with a lot of members of the community.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. I think there was a ton of highlights that you guys definitely touched on, especially for the younger coach that's up and coming. Really valuable information. So thanks for sharing. I'll send it over to Gabe. Thank you.
Lindsay, I want to ask what that was like talking in front of the football team your first time.
I mean, it was weird because, I mean, honestly, I mean, I lived on the same dorm, the floor with these guys and, you know, social situations. And then next thing I'm coming out blowing a whistle, telling them, you know, this is what we're doing and travel. And yeah, I mean, but I was very fortunate. My supervisor, Rourke Cutchlow, I mean, he was great as far as, you know, people respected him. And essentially it's like, okay, if he hired you, I mean, that's what one of the guys, if he hired you, then you know what you're doing. And that was okay. That's all we had to say. And so the respect that came with working under him helped alleviate that. And he wasn't going to put up with anything and no one was going to cross him. So the guys knew that. So that helped the situation, but it was really hard to navigate. And then my own teammates coming into the weight room, I didn't work with swimming, but you know, I lived with these people. I think that was hard to navigate. And I knew early on that that's what I wanted to do. So really trying to separate myself once my last year as an athlete, really, I just kind of hung out with my own team and just separated myself from the other student athletes, knowing that that was kind of going to be my next move. But it was challenging. I wasn't perfect, and you learn and you grow and all of that. But yeah, it was definitely a challenging time.
Thank you for sharing that. And Gabby, you went from a position of being an undergrad into grad school. Is that right? As a graduate assistant at Kansas. So what was that like, making that transition over from being an athlete and you're around all these other student athletes, and now you're on kind of the coaching side of things as a young strength conditioning coach or aspiring strength conditioning coach?
It was humbling for sure and difficult. Like Dink said, I knew everything when I was an undergrad. I had nothing to learn. I this was a perception, obviously, that I knew everything and had nothing to learn and could teach anybody. And so it was definitely humbling. But being able to be in a position where you have mentors around you who can check you and you need to be checked, and be approached with questions that I may have had to ease that transition. But it's definitely, I hate saying trial by fire because it's such a cliche, but it felt like that in the moment. And for sure was difficult and humbling, but it's an experience that a lot of, I think, young coaches are getting into the field, which is great, a lot earlier, that they're going to have to kind of ruminate a little bit on.
And then how was it like working with each other? What was that experience like?
I got a story. I got a good
No,
story.
I already know the story.
I got a good story. Okay.
Sorry.
So I was in the office and it was Dink's first day. Do you know the story? She knows the story.
Of course I know the story. You always tell this story.
It's so good though. So she had been working in the office. We're still getting to know each other. And there's a little knock on my door and I open the door and she, this is when she called me Coach Gabby too. She's like, Coach Gabby? I'm like, yeah. She's like, can I go to the bathroom? And I said, yeah, do you not know where it is? She's like, oh yeah. Just, can I go? I'm like, yes, you can go to the bathroom. And that was just kind of when she came back, we had a good little chat about some of her experiences in the past. And, we commiserated with some of our past experiences as well. But some of my best memories working at Iowa are with Coach Dinkelman, for sure.
Thanks, Gabby. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Good times. Good times. Hey,
Lindsay, the floor is open if there's anything you want to share about working with Gabby. I mean, it seems like she was a great coworker just because she allowed you to go to the bathroom. So
thank God I'm still not holding it. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, she started our internship program. I mean, she was in charge of it before Zach took over. And so I think it's, a testament to her and how great it is. And we just had a lot of fun together. It was a lot of fun. You know, I miss having her around and her laugh, and she welcomed me with open arms and was a great mentor to me, and a great friend. And, you know, I'm still here. So I wish she was still here. So if you want to come back, we have interim positions open. So for the spring, not paid though.
I think Gabby, I think day one, I just called you Gabby. I didn't call you Coach Gabby.
You want me to share that story too?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh my goodness.
Go ahead.
It annoys
Okay.
you. It annoys you. So
It
yes.
still annoys me, actually, to this day. It's still annoying. Preseason with women's soccer, I'll provide some context, is very challenging and busy and exhausting. And it was Gabe's first day. And he obviously was there early, waiting in the parking lot. And I'm hustling back to the weight room to grab various pieces of equipment. And he doesn't really say much. He kind of just steps in front of me with his hand extended, says, "You must be Gabby. I'm Gabe." And I said, "Hi, it's nice to meet you." And he said, "It's my first day." I said, "Well, great. Do you need, can I help you with that first day? Can we go to the office?" Like, "Oh no, I'm just waiting for Todd," who was the director at the time. I said, "All right, well, excited to have you here," and just kind of carried on my way. But I'll never forget just seeing the hand and the arm before the face.
Yeah, I went to the bathroom before that, so I didn't have to ask you. I made sure to do
Gabby
that.
interaction though. Like, what do you want? Like, why are you
Yes.
here? Why are you standing
like,
in front of me right now?
How can I help you?
Okay, cool. Good for you. Glad you know your name.
Gabby used to make us do these earn your shirt workouts. I will say that part of the internship did not stick around. As soon as she left, it was like the day after she was gone. I was like, look, we're not doing these stupid workouts anymore.
They were
She
so
would, it was
stupid.
basically, it was like a CrossFit workout, and you know, we would make our interns do it, and all of the staff, the full-time staff would do it too. It was like a bonding time, and then they would get another t-shirt. Earn your shirt is what it was called. And it was the worst workout. It was basically just an hour of people screaming profanities at each other, specifically at Gabby because she wrote the workout. And we did that for many intern classes, and I'm glad. I'm too old to do that anymore.
Yeah, it died when I left. No one,
Yeah.
It's not a thing anymore.
It was bad.
So speaking of training and different various workouts, it's the question that we want to finish with here. For the K.E.S, something we ask everybody is, what does your own training look like right now? Are you training for anything specific, experimenting, just happy to be on the floor training for 30 minutes if you have it? What does that look like? And we'll start with Lindsay and then finish up with Gabby.
Well, I had a baby 4 months ago. So the last year of training has been very different for me. So I actually just worked out 2 days consecutive this week. So trying to get back on the horse after having a kid. So that's been, you know, I did some RDLs and immediately cramped. So that's where we're at. Outside of that though, normally, yeah, typical just 3 to 4 days a week. I like to get a lift in, do some treadmill walking, have my own time to, whether it's listen to something, watch some Netflix. That's my time on the treadmill. Hopefully I can get that in a few times a week. On the road, I always try to get a workout in at the hotel. But yeah, I'm not an Olympic lifter. Gabby used to make me do crazy workouts with her when she was here. Again, we were much younger and able to do that. But yeah, just kind of getting back on the horse currently.
I don't have an excuse. Let's be formal here. Balance is key. We all go through, I guess, phases in our training, in our lives. And I'm almost 40. So I really kind of harp on that balance is key. So I like to have fun with my training. If the training happens, I play soccer on a co-ed old people's indoor league. We mostly just play for the beer after. And I've actually found, honestly, that having a gym membership outside of working out where I work has been really helpful. It's just a nice little space where I can disassociate what I do for a living to just work out a little bit.
Yeah, you should check out that boxing gym, that Emerald City boxing gym that I used to go to up there. I remember like my second day there, the guy's like, yeah, you can get in there and spar. I was like, that was my second and last day there. So highly recommend it.
You took me there once. I went once.
Did we go?
Yeah. Yeah, we did. It was rough.
Was that your only time there too? Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate that. And congratulations, Lindsay, on the baby. That's awesome. Congrats to you and your family. But that is all the time we have for today. A big thank you to our attendees that joined us live for the K.E.S. and a huge thank you to our two panelists, Coach Lindsay Alexander and Coach Gabby Quiggle. We're incredibly appreciative of their time and willingness to join us today. Please be sure to give them both a follow on social media. Lindsay, you can follow on Twitter at LJ Dink, and University of Iowa Strength Conditioning staff at Iowa Performance. And also please check out the podcast that was mentioned out of the University of Iowa, led by the women's tennis coach. That's HERkys Voice. Is that right?
HERkys.
HERkys. Thank you. And how do you spell that?
HERkys.
HERkys. Awesome. Thank you. And Gabby, you can follow her in the UW staff at UW_Oli Strength on Twitter and at UW Oli SC on Instagram. This discussion will be publicly available on the Keiser Fitness YouTube page, and the audio will be up on Spotify as well under Keiser Education Series. Thank you and have a great day.